Bella Sinclair was balancing 3 cups of hot coffee when her phone rang. In that moment, she couldn't imagine that the next 30 seconds would shatter her perfectly organized life like a house of cards in the middle of a hurricane. "Bella, you need to sit down." Her sister Isabel's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "I can't sit down, Izzy. I'm serving breakfast to the guests, and Mrs. Henderson will fire me if I'm late one more time," Bella whispered, trying to balance the cups while walking through the Colonial Inn where she had worked for 2 years. "Dad has been arrested." The 3 cups shattered on the century-old wooden floor, the dark coffee spreading like an ominous prophecy. Bella stood paralyzed, watching the porcelain fragments at her feet. "What did you say?" "Dad, the police showed up early this morning. They say he embezzled $2 million from the construction company." Bella's world collapsed. A retired math teacher, Sebastian Sinclair, was the most honest man she knew. The kind of person who returned incorrect change at the supermarket and never jaywalked, not even at 3 in the morning on a deserted street. "That's impossible, Izzy. Dad can barely use the ATM. How could he embezzle money from a company?" "I know, but they have documents, Bella. Documents with his signature, bank accounts. It all looks very real." Bella crouched down to collect the shards, her hands trembling. A piece of porcelain cut her index finger, a drop of blood mixing with the spilled coffee. "Where is he now?" "At the Central Police Station. The lawyer we managed to get says that—" Isabel swallowed hard. "That it could be 15 years in prison if he's convicted." 15 years. Her father was 68 years old. If convicted, he would practically die in prison. "Bella Sinclair!" Mrs. Henderson's shrill voice cut through the air like a blade. "What is this mess?" Bella looked up, still holding the phone against her ear. The inn's owner, a 50-year-old woman with dyed red hair and a permanently irritated expression, observed the scene with crossed arms. "It was an accident, Mrs. Henderson. I'll clean it up immediately and—" "You're fired. Please, I need this job. There was an emergency in my family and you should have thought of that before destroying my china. Get your things and leave." Bella hung up the phone and stood up slowly, ignoring the cut on her finger that continued bleeding. In less than 5 minutes, she had lost her job and discovered that her father was imprisoned for a crime he would never commit. 3 hours later, she was sitting in the waiting room of a law office downtown, nervously flipping through a gossip magazine. Isabel had managed to schedule an emergency consultation with Dr. Henry Morrison, considered one of the best criminal lawyers in the state. "You may come in now," said the secretary, an elegant middle-aged woman. The office was impressive, walls lined with legal books, mahogany furniture, and a panoramic view of the city. Behind an imposing desk, Dr. Morrison awaited them. He was a distinguished-looking man with graying hair and expensive suits, but his eyes conveyed sincerity. "Please, sit down. I've read the preliminary case file for your father and—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The situation is delicate." "He's innocent," Bella said firmly. "My father wouldn't do this." "I believe you, Miss Sinclair, but the judicial system doesn't work based on personal convictions, and the evidence against your father is substantial." Isabel squeezed her sister's hand. "Doctor, what can we do?" "Fight, investigate, find evidence that proves his innocence. But we need to be realistic. This will cost a lot of money and time." "How much?" Bella asked, although she knew they probably couldn't afford it. "For an adequate defense, considering private investigation and all stages of the process, about $300,000. The number echoed in the room like a gunshot. Bella and Isabel looked at each other in despair. Together, they barely had $3,000 in their accounts. "Is there any alternative?" Bella asked, her voice almost disappearing. Dr. Morrison hesitated. "Well, there's a possibility. Unconventional. One of my clients has an unusual proposal for young people in difficult financial situations. He's looking for people willing to do temporary work in exchange for generous payments." "What kind of work?" Isabel frowned. "I can't give details without his approval." but I can guarantee it's legal and, let's say, theatrical. It involves playing a role for a determined period. Bella felt a chill down her spine. Sounds like disguised prostitution, she thought. But then, the image of her father behind bars invaded her mind. How can I contact this person? Dr. Morrison scribbled something on a paper and handed it to her. Call this number. Say you were referred by me. But think carefully before you do, Bella. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. As they left the office, Isabel pulled her sister's arm. Bella, this doesn't seem safe to me. Izzy, our father is imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. If there's a chance to save him, I have to try. That night, alone in her small apartment, Bella stared at the paper with the phone number. The cut on her finger had stopped bleeding, but left a mark that seemed to symbolize how her life had changed in an instant. At 11 o'clock at night, she finally dialed. Taylor Residence, a female voice answered, formal and impersonal. Hi, Dr. Henry Morrison gave me this number. My name is Bella Sinclair. One moment, please. The wait seemed eternal. Then a male voice took over the line. Deep, controlled, with an accent she couldn't completely identify. Miss Sinclair, I was expecting your call. Dr. Morrison said you have a job proposal. Not over the phone. Can you be at my office tomorrow at 9 in the morning? He dictated an address in the city's most upscale neighborhood. I can, but I'd like to know at least what this is about. Until tomorrow, Miss Sinclair. The call was ended, leaving Bella with more questions than answers. She spent the night awake, alternating between hope and terror, not imagining that she was about to meet the man who would change her life forever, Richard Taylor, the most feared and desired millionaire in the country. A man who would make a proposal so absurd that she could only accept it out of desperation. And who, unknowingly, had already decided that Bella Sinclair would be the solution to all his problems, or the cause of his downfall. Bella stood before the gleaming glass tower that housed Taylor Enterprises, feeling like David about to face Goliath armed with nothing but a borrowed blazer and sheer desperation. The building stretched 40 floors into the Seattle sky, its reflective surface making her feel impossibly small. You can do this, she whispered to herself, clutching her worn purse. For Dad. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Marble floors so polished they looked like mirrors, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her yearly salary, and a waterfall cascading down one entire wall. Even the air smelled expensive. Miss Sinclair? A woman in her 30s approached, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit. I'm Victoria Chen, Mr. Taylor's executive assistant. He's expecting you. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to heaven, or hell. Bella couldn't decide which. Victoria made polite small talk about the weather, but Bella barely heard her over the thundering of her own heartbeat. The executive floor was a study in controlled power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay, while the decor screamed understated luxury. Employees moved with purpose, their conversations conducted in hushed, reverent tones. Mr. Taylor will see you now, Victoria said, stopping before imposing double doors made of dark wood. Bella stepped inside and immediately understood why Richard Taylor was both feared and desired. The man behind the massive desk wasn't just handsome, he was devastating. Dark hair perfectly styled, sharp jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than her father's monthly pension, and when he looked up from his documents, Bella felt the air leave her lungs. Miss Sinclair. His voice was exactly as she remembered from the phone, deep, controlled, with an edge that suggested he wasn't used to being denied. Punctual. I appreciate that. Mr. Taylor. She managed to keep her voice steady, though her knees felt like jello. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat, trying not to be intimidated by his intense scrutiny. It felt like being examined under a microscope by a particularly attractive scientist. Dr. Morrison says your father is in trouble. It wasn't a question. He's innocent. The words tumbled out. My father is the most honest man alive. He wouldn't steal a penny, let alone $2 million. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Surprise, respect. It was gone too quickly to interpret. I'm sure he is, but innocence doesn't pay legal fees. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. I have a proposition for you, Miss Sinclair, one that will solve your financial problems immediately. Bella's mouth went dry. What kind of proposition? Richard stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. From this angle, she could see the strong line of his shoulders, the way his suit jacket fit perfectly across his broad back. Focus, Bella. You're here for Dad, not to ogle a gorgeous millionaire. Are you familiar with the concept of a business marriage, Miss Sinclair? Her heart stopped. Excuse me. He turned around, and there was something almost predatory in his smile. A temporary arrangement. Two parties entering into a mutually beneficial contract. You want me to marry you? The words squeaked out. Not permanently. 6 months. You would accompany me on business trips, attend social functions, and play the role of my devoted wife. In return, I'll pay all your father's legal expenses and provide you with a generous compensation package. Bella stared at him, convinced she'd misheard. You want to pay me to pretend to be your wife? Precisely. That's... She struggled for words. That's insane. Is it? Richard moved closer and she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse race. I need a wife for business reasons. You need money for legal reasons. It's a simple transaction. Simple? Bella shot to her feet, anger overriding her nervousness. Marriage isn't a transaction, Mr. Taylor. Even fake marriage. Isn't it? His eyebrows rose with apparent amusement. Most marriages are built on less honest foundations than ours would be. At least we'd both know exactly what we're getting. Which is what, exactly? For you, your father's freedom and financial security. For me, the respectability that comes with having a wife, which I need to close a particular business deal. Bella began pacing, her mind reeling. This is crazy. I don't even know you. What's to know? I'm 32, single, worth approximately $800 million, and I have all my teeth. I'm also told I'm not entirely unpleasant to look at. Despite everything, Bella almost smiled. Almost. Modest, too. False modesty is a waste of time. I'm offering you a solution to your problem, Miss Sinclair. The question is, how much do you love your father? The question hit like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind. Her father teaching her to ride a bike, helping with math homework, walking her to school every day after her mother died. Sebastian Sinclair had been her rock, her hero, her everything. I love him more than my own life, she whispered. Then you have your answer. Bella sank back into the chair, overwhelmed. 6 months? 6 months. We'll travel to Hong Kong, London, and Dubai for various business meetings. You'll need to be convincing as my wife, affectionate, supportive, the perfect corporate spouse. And after 6 months, we divorce quietly. You walk away with enough money to start fresh anywhere you want. How much money are we talking about? $500,000 plus all expenses. And of course your father's legal fees, which I estimate will be around $400,000. Nearly $1 million. Enough to save her father and change her life forever. Bella felt dizzy. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. The first business trip is in 1 week. She stood on shaky legs. This is insane. Perhaps. But it's also your only option, unless you have $900,000 hidden somewhere. At the door she turned back. Why me? You could have any woman you wanted for this arrangement. For the first time, Richard's composure cracked slightly, revealing something vulnerable underneath. Because every other woman I know would fall in love with me. And love, Miss Sinclair, is the one thing that could destroy this arrangement. Bella's heart did something strange in her chest. What makes you so sure I won't? His smile was sharp as a blade. Because you already hate me. I can see it in your eyes. She wanted to deny it, but couldn't. There was something about Richard Taylor that simultaneously attracted and repelled her. His arrogance, his assumption that everything had a price, his cold calculation of human emotion. You're right, she said quietly. I do hate you. Perfect. Then we understand each other completely. As Bella left the building, her head spinning with the magnitude of what had just happened, she couldn't shake the feeling that Richard Taylor was wrong about one thing. Hatred and love were often separated by the thinnest of lines. And 6 months was a very long time. Bella stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her tiny apartment, wondering if desperation had finally driven her insane. 24 hours had passed since Richard Taylor's outrageous proposal, and she hadn't slept a wink. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw 2 images, her father behind bars, and Richard's storm-gray eyes challenging her to be brave enough to save him. You're actually considering this, she whispered to her reflection. The woman staring back looked exhausted, terrified, but determined. Her phone buzzed with a text from Isabel. Just visited Dad. He's trying to stay strong, but I can see he's breaking. Any updates on the lawyer situation? Bella's heart clenched. She typed back, working on it. Don't give up hope. The lie tasted bitter, but what else could she say? Actually, Izzy, I'm about to enter a fake marriage with a gorgeous, arrogant millionaire who thinks love is a business transaction. At 8:47 a.m., she found herself standing outside Taylor Enterprises again, clutching a small overnight bag. If she was going to do this, she needed to lay down some ground rules first. Victoria Chen greeted her with the same professional smile. Mr. Taylor is in the conference room. He's been expecting you. The conference room was even more intimidating than his office. A long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, with a view that made Seattle look like... Richard sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents, looking every inch the corporate predator in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Miss Sinclair. He didn't look up. I assume your presence here means you've made your decision. I have conditions, Bella said without preamble, setting her bag down with more force than necessary. That got his attention. His eyes lifted to hers, one eyebrow arching with what might have been amusement. Conditions? If we're doing this, we do it my way. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her purse. I spent all night writing these down. How thorough of you. He gestured to the chair beside him. Please, enlighten me. Bella sat, trying to ignore how his cologne made her pulse flutter. Focus. You're negotiating with the devil here. First, she began, unfolding her paper. Separate bedrooms at all times. I don't care if it's the presidential suite. We sleep separately. Agreed. Though I should mention that some of our accommodations will require us to share a suite. I can arrange for a sofa. You take the sofa. Richard's lips twitched. Of course. Next? No kissing unless absolutely necessary for appearances. And if it is necessary, you warn me first. How romantic, he said dryly. Anything else in your list of romantic restrictions? Bella felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm not finished. Third, no personal questions about my past, my dreams, or my feelings. This is business, not therapy. Interesting. So I'm not allowed to get to know my own wife. Fake wife. Temporary fake wife. There's a difference. If you say so, continue. Fourth, I get to visit my father whenever I want, no questions asked. And fifth, she hesitated, then lifted her chin defiantly. You respect the fact that I find this entire arrangement morally questionable. Richard leaned back, studying her with those penetrating grey eyes. Anything else? Actually, yes. I want it in writing that if you try to seduce me or take advantage of this situation in any way, the deal is off and you still pay my father's legal fees. Something dangerous flickered across his features. Miss Sinclair, let me be very clear about something. I have never, in my entire life, had to seduce a woman who didn't want to be seduced. If I wanted you in my bed, which I don't, you'd come willingly. The arrogance in his voice made her see red. You're unbelievable. I'm honest. There's a difference. He pulled a thick document from the table. Speaking of honesty, here's the contract. My lawyers worked all night on it. Bella took the papers with trembling hands. The legal jargon made her head spin, but the numbers were clear. $500,000 to her, $400,000 for legal fees, plus all travel expenses and a clothing allowance. Clothing allowance? You'll need appropriate attire for the functions we'll attend. Consider it a costume budget for your performance. Performance, she repeated bitterly. That's all this is to you, isn't it? One big performance. Isn't that what you want it to be? Clean, simple, emotionless? She met his gaze and saw something she couldn't quite identify lurking beneath the surface. For just a moment, Richard Taylor looked almost lonely. The moment passed so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. Where do I sign? She asked quietly. He slid a gold pen across the table. Page 15. Right next to mine. As Bella signed her name, she felt like she was signing away more than just 6 months of her life. She was signing away her principles, her self-respect, and possibly her sanity. Congratulations, Mrs. Taylor, Richard said as she set down the pen. We're now legally bound in matrimony. It's not real, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Isn't it? We're married in the eyes of the law. We'll share a name, a home, a bed. We will not share a bed. Metaphorically speaking. For the next 6 months, your life belongs to me. Bella stood abruptly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd just done. I need air. Sit down, Mrs. Taylor. We need to discuss your transformation. My what? Richard's smile was pure predator. You don't think I can take you to meet international business moguls looking like a struggling waitress, do you? Starting tomorrow, you'll work with a team of stylists, etiquette coaches, and language tutors. Language tutors? You'll need conversational Mandarin for Hong Kong and basic Arabic for Dubai. Don't look so panicked. You have a week. Bella sank back into her chair, feeling like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. This is really happening. Oh, it's happening. And Mrs. Taylor? He leaned closer, close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes. I suggest you start practicing looking like you adore me. Because in 7 days, we leave for Hong Kong, and everyone we meet needs to believe that you're desperately, hopelessly, madly in love with me. That's going to be quite a performance, she managed. The performance of a lifetime, he agreed. I do hope you're up for the challenge. As Victoria appeared to escort her out, Bella realized she was no longer Bella Sinclair, struggling waitress trying to save her father. She was Mrs. Richard Taylor, trophy wife and master of deception. The question was, in a game this dangerous, who would be playing whom? Absolutely not. Bella stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors of the most exclusive salon in Seattle, horrified by what the team of stylists was suggesting. The woman with the severe bob and calculating eyes, introduced as Margot, celebrity image consultant to the stars, held up a swatch of platinum blonde hair. Mrs. Taylor, your husband specifically requested we give you a complete transformation. Blonde is sophisticated, approachable, and photographs beautifully. My husband, Bella said through gritted teeth, can take his blonde fantasies and... Is there a problem here? That voice. Bella's spine straightened automatically as Richard appeared in the salon's VIP suite, looking annoyingly perfect in his navy suit. How did he manage to make even a hair salon look like his personal boardroom? Mr. Taylor, Margot practically genuflected. We were just discussing Mrs. Taylor's color options. She wants to bleach my hair, Bella said accusingly, crossing her arms. I look like a corpse as a blonde. Richard studied her reflection with those penetrating gray eyes, and Bella felt heat creep up her neck. She was wearing the salon's silk robe, her dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders, and suddenly she felt far too exposed under his scrutiny. "Keep the brown," he said finally. "But cut it. Shoulder length, elegant. Something that moves." "But, Mr. Taylor, the blonde would be so much more." "I said keep it brown." His tone brooked no argument, and Margot immediately backed down. Bella felt an unexpected flutter of gratitude. No, that couldn't be right. This was probably just another control move. "However," Richard continued, settling into a leather chair like he owned the place, "everything else is negotiable." 3 hours later, Bella barely recognized herself. Her hair had been cut into a sleek, sophisticated bob that framed her face perfectly. Her eyebrows had been shaped, her skin was glowing from some mysterious facial treatment, and a makeup artist had somehow made her green eyes look twice as large and infinitely more mysterious. "Much better," Richard said, appearing behind her in the mirror. "Now you look like someone who could actually be married to me." "Gee, thanks," Bella muttered, but she couldn't deny that she looked different. Polished, expensive. Don't get comfortable. We're just getting started. The next stop was a boutique so exclusive it didn't even have a name on the door. The owner, a thin woman named Simone with a French accent that might or might not have been authentic, greeted Richard like he was royalty. "Monsieur Taylor, and this must be the lovely wife." Magnifique. For the next 2 hours, Bella was treated like a living doll, draped in silks and cashmeres, measured and pinned and adjusted until she felt like she might scream. Richard sat in an armchair, occasionally nodding approval or rejection at various outfits, making comments like too young, too severe, or perfect for the Dubai meeting. "I feel like a dress-up doll," Bella complained, when they took a brief break. "You're playing a role," Richard replied, not looking up from his phone. "Consider this your costume fitting. Easy for you to say. You get to stay yourself." Something flickered across his features. "Do I?" Before she could ask what he meant, Simone returned with an armload of evening gowns. "For the Hong Kong charity gala," she explained. "Something that will make all the other wives jealous, no?" The first dress was stunning, a deep emerald silk that brought out her eyes. But it was the second one that made everyone in the room go silent. Midnight blue, it hugged her curves like it had been made for her body specifically, with delicate beading that caught the light when she moved. "That one," Richard said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Bella turned to look at him and was startled by the intensity in his gaze. For a moment, the air between them crackled with something that definitely wasn't fake marriage energy. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the delicate fabric. "It's you," he said, then seemed to catch himself. "It's appropriate for the event." The moment was broken when Simone clapped her hands together. "Parfait. And the shoes to match, of course." By the time they left the boutique, Bella's head was spinning with all the measurements, fittings, and appointments that would fill the next week. Etiquette lessons with someone called the Duchess, Bella was afraid to ask, Mandarin tutoring, dance lessons, apparently she needed to waltz, and something ominously labeled corporate wife intensive. "This is insane," she said as Richard's driver held open the door of his sleek black Mercedes. "I'm going to forget who I am." "That's rather the point," Richard said, sliding in beside her. "Bella Sinclair doesn't have the confidence to walk into a room full of billionaires and make them believe she belongs there. But Mrs. Richard Taylor does. And what if I like being Bella Sinclair?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. "Then you're luckier than most people." There was something almost wistful in his tone that made Bella study his profile. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Forget I said anything." But Bella couldn't forget. For just a moment, the mask had slipped, and she'd seen something vulnerable underneath Richard Taylor's polished exterior. Something that suggested he might understand better than anyone what it felt like to lose yourself in someone else's expectations. The car pulled up in front of a gleaming apartment building in the most expensive part of the city. "Home sweet home," Richard said, though there was no sweetness in his voice. The penthouse was exactly what Bella had expected, all glass and steel and stunning views, decorated in shades of gray and black with splashes of deep blue. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and completely without warmth. "Your room is down the hall," Richard said, loosening his tie. "I'll have your things moved from your apartment tomorrow." "Just like that? I don't get a say in leaving my home?" "It's hardly a home, Bella. It's a studio apartment with walls so thin you can hear your neighbors breathing." She wanted to argue, but he was right. Her apartment was tiny and shabby, and probably had mice. Still, it was hers. "The guest room has its own bathroom and a view of the Sound," Richard continued. "I think you'll be comfortable." Comfortable, not happy, not at home. Comfortable. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly feeling lost in this cavernous, sterile space. Richard poured himself a scotch from a crystal decanter, not offering her one. "Now you become the woman I need you to be. Smart enough to hold intelligent conversations, polished enough to fit in at any social function, and devoted enough that no one questions why I married you. And you? What do you become?" He took a long sip of his drink, those storm-gray eyes meeting hers over the rim of the glass. "I become the man who married for love instead of convenience. The man who's finally been tamed by the right woman. That's quite a performance for you, too." "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." As Bella made her way to her new room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this arrangement was going to change them both in ways neither of them anticipated. And despite all her conditions and protests, she was starting to wonder if 6 months would be enough time to figure out who Richard Taylor really was beneath all that expensive armor. Or if she'd lose herself completely trying. Bella had never flown first class before. Hell, she'd barely flown at all. So when Richard's private jet turned out to be essentially a flying mansion, complete with a bedroom, full kitchen, and what appeared to be an actual office, she tried very hard not to gawk like the small-town girl she absolutely was. "Close your mouth, darling," Richard said, without looking up from his laptop. "You're supposed to be used to this lifestyle." "Right. Sorry." Bella settled into the leather seat across from him, smoothing her new cashmere sweater. After a week of intensive training with the Duchess, who turned out to be a terrifying British woman named Lady Pemberton, she could now walk in heels, make small talk about art markets, and eat soup without slurping. Whether she could actually pull off being Mrs. Richard Taylor remained to be seen. "We need to go over our story again," Richard said, closing the laptop. "How we met, when we knew we were in love, why we got married so quickly." Bella's stomach clenched. They'd rehearsed this a dozen times, but it still felt like preparing to lie to a tribunal. "We met at a charity auction 6 months ago. You were bidding on a painting. I was there with a friend." "Which friend?" "Sarah Mitchell, old college roommate, works in PR now." The lies rolled off her tongue with disturbing ease. "You outbid everyone for a piece by some local artist I'd mentioned admiring." "Very romantic of me," Richard said dryly. "And then?" "Then you asked me to coffee to discuss the painting. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend trips. And 3 months later you proposed during a sunset sail around Elliott Bay. And you said yes because—" Bella met his eyes, and for a moment the practiced response stuck in her throat. Because in the story they'd crafted, she was desperately in love with him. Because Richard Taylor in their fiction was charming and romantic and completely different from the calculating man sitting across from her. "Because I couldn't imagine my life without you," she said softly. Something flickered across Richard's face. "Good. Remember that feeling when we're in public. You need to look at me like I hung the moon. That's going to be quite a performance. The performance of your life," he reminded her. "Speaking of which, we need to discuss physical affection." Bella's cheeks burned. "We covered this. Minimal touching. You warned me before any kissing." "Bella," his voice was patient but firm, "we're going to be under constant scrutiny. Businessmen who've known me for years, their wives who gossip professionally, reporters looking for any sign of weakness. If we look like polite strangers, this whole charade falls apart. He was right, and she hated that he was right. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you let me touch you without looking like you're being attacked by a spider. Richard moved to sit beside her, and Bella immediately tensed. See? That's not the reaction of a woman madly in love with her husband. Sorry, it's just, I'm not used to what? Being touched? There was something almost gentle in his voice. To being touched by you, she clarified quickly. We barely know each other. Richard studied her for a long moment. Then let's practice. Give me your hand. Bella hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His fingers were warm, calloused in unexpected places, and when he lifted her hand to brush a soft kiss across her knuckles, her breath caught. Better, he murmured, not releasing her hand. Now lean into me, like you belong here. This was harder. It meant closing the careful distance she'd maintained, meant letting down her guard. But slowly she let herself relax against his side, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. Good, Richard said, and she felt the word rumble through his chest. Now, when we're in public, this needs to feel natural, unconscious. Bella tried to ignore how good he smelled, how solid and warm he felt, how her traitorous heart was beating faster. How long do we have to practice this? 14 hours to Hong Kong. Think that's enough time to convince people we're in love? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. Bella was acutely aware of Richard's thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand, of the way his breathing had subtly changed. Tell me about Hong Kong, she said, desperate to break the tension. What should I expect? Richard's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 days of meetings with the Chen Corporation about a hotel development deal. James Chen is old-school traditional, family values, respect for marriage, that sort of thing. His wife Eleanor is formidable. If she doesn't approve of you, the deal dies. No pressure or anything, Bella muttered. There's also a charity gala on our second night. 500 of Hong Kong's most influential people, and every one of them will be watching us. Bella's anxiety spiked. What if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing or use the wrong fork or, hey? Richard's free hand tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're going to be fine. You're intelligent, you're beautiful, and after this week's training, you know more about international etiquette than most diplomats' wives. You think I'm beautiful? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Richard's eyes darkened. I think any man who doesn't see how beautiful you are is either blind or an idiot. The compliment hit her like a physical force, warming her from the inside out. This was dangerous territory. Moments like this made her forget that their entire relationship was a business transaction. Richard, she whispered, not even sure what she was asking. I know, he said quietly. This is getting complicated. Before either of them could say anything else, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Mr. Taylor, we're beginning our descent into Hong Kong International Airport. Please prepare for landing. Richard released her hand and moved back to his original seat, the spell broken. Remember, he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone. From the moment we step off this plane, you're my devoted wife. Can you do that? Bella straightened her shoulders, calling on every lesson from the past week. I can do that. Good. Because there's something I didn't tell you. Richard's expression grew serious. James Chen's son Michael will be there. He's been trying to get me into business with him for 2 years, and he's persistent in his interest in my personal life. Meaning he's made it clear he thinks I need the right kind of wife to be truly successful in Asian markets. This entire deal may hinge on whether he believes our marriage is real. Bella felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Not just Richard's business deal, but her father's freedom depended on her ability to convince strangers they were in love. What if I can't pull it off? Richard met her eyes, and for a moment she saw something that looked almost like vulnerability. Then we both lose everything that matters to us. As the plane touched down in Hong Kong, Bella realized that somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, the stakes had gotten much higher than just money and legal fees. Now she was fighting to save not just her father, but the strange, unexpected connection that was growing between her and the man she was supposed to hate. A connection that felt dangerously close to the real thing. The Peninsula Hong Kong was exactly the kind of hotel where Bella would have felt intimidated just walking through the lobby 6 months ago. Now, wearing a perfectly tailored cream dress and with Richard's hand possessively at the small of her back, she glided through the marble-floored entrance like she'd been born to luxury. "You're a natural," Richard murmured in her ear as they approached the front desk, his breath warm against her skin. "Just remember to smile like you're completely besotted with me." "I'm trying to picture you in your underwear," Bella whispered back. "It's helping with the nausea." She felt his chest shake with suppressed laughter. "Whatever works, darling." The endearment sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. During the flight, they'd agreed to use pet names in public, but hearing darling in Richard's deep voice felt far too intimate for comfort. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor," a distinguished Chinese man in an impeccable suit approached them with arms outstretched. "James Chen. Welcome to Hong Kong." "James," Richard stepped forward, his demeanor shifting seamlessly into warm business partner mode. "Thank you for hosting us. I'd like you to meet my wife, Bella." This was it, the moment of truth. Bella extended her hand with what she hoped was the perfect balance of confidence and warmth. "Mr. Chen, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Richard has told me so much about your beautiful city." "The pleasure is entirely mine, Mrs. Taylor." James Chen's eyes crinkled as he smiled, and Bella felt her first flutter of hope. "And this is my wife, Eleanor, and my son Michael." Eleanor Chen was a petite woman with sharp eyes and an expensive handbag, who looked like she could dissect a person's character in 30 seconds. Michael was handsome in a smooth, practiced way that immediately put Bella on guard. "Mrs. Taylor," Eleanor said, her English crisp and formal. "How lovely to finally meet Richard's bride. We were all quite surprised when we heard he had married. So sudden." Bella felt Richard tense beside her, his hand tightening protectively on her back. "When you know, you know," she said with a laugh that sounded perfectly natural. "Richard swept me off my feet so completely that I couldn't imagine waiting." "A whirlwind romance," Michael said, his tone carrying a hint of skepticism. "How modern." "Love doesn't follow schedules, Michael," Richard said smoothly. "Surely a romantic like yourself can appreciate that." The subtle dig made Michael's smile sharpen, and Bella realized she was witnessing some kind of masculine chess match she didn't fully understand. "Perhaps we should show you to your suite," Eleanor interjected diplomatically. "You must be tired from the flight." Their suite was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Victoria Harbour, fresh orchids on every surface, and a sitting area that was larger than Bella's entire former apartment. There was also, she noted with relief, a separate bedroom. "This is incredible," Bella breathed, moving to the windows to take in the stunning view of the harbour. "I'm glad you approve," Richard said, but his voice sounded strained. Bella turned to find him loosening his tie, the first crack in his perfect composure since they'd landed. "Everything okay?" "Michael suspects something. Did you see the way he was watching us?" "He was watching me," Bella corrected. "There's a difference." Richard's eyes flashed with something that looked suspiciously like jealousy. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he spent more time looking at my legs than my face during that conversation." "He's not suspicious about our marriage. He's interested in your wife." The look that crossed Richard's face was thunderous. "Over my dead body." "Relax, fake husband. I can handle one smooth-talking playboy." Bella kicked off her heels and sank onto the plush sofa. "Besides, his interest might actually help us. Nothing makes a marriage look more real than a little jealousy." Richard stalked to the bar and poured himself a scotch. "I don't like him looking at you that way." "Why? It's not like we're really married." He was quiet for so long that Bella looked up to find him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "No," he said finally. "We're not." But something in his tone made her heart skip a beat. The business dinner that evening was held in a private dining room at one of Hong Kong's most exclusive restaurants. Bella wore the midnight blue dress from Seattle, and the way Richard's eyes darkened when he saw her made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "You look stunning," he said, his voice rougher than usual as he helped her into the car. "Thank you," she whispered, hyper-aware of his hand on her bare shoulder. The dinner was a carefully orchestrated dance of business and social niceties. Bella found herself seated between Eleanor Chen and Michael, while Richard held court with James and several other business associates at the other end of the table. "So tell me, Mrs. Taylor," Eleanor said as the first course arrived, "what do you think of Hong Kong so far?" "It's magical," Bella replied honestly. "The energy here is incredible. I can see why Richard is so excited about this project." "And what do you do when you're not supporting your husband's business ventures?" The question was casual, but Bella sensed a test underneath. "I volunteer with literacy programs," she said, drawing on the cover story they'd carefully crafted. "Education has always been important to me. My father was a teacher." This was true, at least, and the sincerity in her voice seemed to soften Eleanor's expression. "How wonderful. Too many young wives today are only interested in shopping and social media." "Oh, I love a good shopping trip," Bella laughed. "But Richard always says the most beautiful thing about a woman is her mind." Across the table, she caught Richard's eye. He was watching her with something that looked almost like pride, and when he smiled, her heart did that stupid fluttering thing again. "Your husband is a very wise man," Eleanor said approvingly. "He is," Bella agreed, and was startled to realize she meant it. As the evening progressed, she found herself relaxing into the role. She laughed at James Chen's stories about his early business ventures, asked Eleanor intelligent questions about Hong Kong's art scene, and managed to deflect Michael's increasingly obvious attempts at flirtation without being rude. But it was the small moments that felt most dangerous. When Richard's hand found hers under the table during the main course. When he leaned over to whisper something that made her laugh, his lips brushing her ear. When he helped her with her wrap at the end of the evening, his fingers lingering on her shoulders just a moment too long. "You were perfect tonight," he said, as their car pulled away from the restaurant. "Eleanor loves you, James is impressed, and even Michael seemed convinced." "Good," Bella said, but she felt strangely deflated. Mission accomplished. Is something wrong? She looked at him, really looked at him, in the dim light of the car. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her chest tight. "It's just, for a few hours tonight, it felt real, like we were actually a couple who cared about each other." She laughed shakily. "Stupid, right?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Not stupid, dangerous." "Why dangerous?" He met her eyes, and the intensity there took her breath away. "Because I was thinking the same thing." The admission hung between them like a live wire, crackling with possibility and terror. Bella felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step would send her tumbling into something she couldn't control. "Richard," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. "Don't," he said quickly. "Don't say anything we'll both regret tomorrow." But as they rode the elevator up to their suite in charged silence, Bella couldn't help wondering if the biggest regret might be not saying anything at all. Because somewhere between the fake smiles and practiced touches, something very real was blooming between them. And in 3 more days, they'd have to go back to pretending it didn't exist. Bella stood on the balcony of their Hong Kong suite at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep. The harbor glittered below like scattered diamonds. But all she could think about was the way Richard had looked at her in the elevator, like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. Can't sleep either. She turned to find Richard leaning against the doorframe, his shirt unbuttoned and hair mussed. In the soft lighting from the harbor, He looked less like the intimidating businessman and more like just a man. A devastatingly attractive, completely off-limits man who was supposed to be nothing more than a business arrangement. "Too much excitement for one day," she said, wrapping her silk robe tighter around herself. Richard moved to stand beside her at the railing, careful to maintain distance but close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "You were incredible tonight," he said quietly. "I've never seen Eleanor Chen warm up to someone so quickly. She actually laughed at your stories. She's lovely once you get past the intimidating exterior." Bella glanced at him sideways. "Kind of like someone else I know." "I'm not lovely, Bella. Don't make the mistake of thinking otherwise." There was something bitter in his tone that made her heart clench. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Put yourself down. Act like you're some kind of monster when you're clearly not." Richard's laugh was humorless. "You don't know me. The real me." "Then tell me." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "We're supposed to be married, Richard. Even fake spouses should know something real about each other." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My parents had the kind of marriage people write about in business journals. Strategic alliance, perfect on paper, completely devoid of actual affection. I learned early that love was a weakness people exploited." He gripped the railing tighter. "I built my entire life around never being vulnerable to anyone." "That sounds lonely." "Lonely is safe." He turned to look at her, and the raw honesty in his expression made her breath catch. "Until now." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Bella felt her careful walls crumbling, all her rules about keeping this arrangement strictly business dissolving in the face of his unexpected vulnerability. "Richard," she whispered. "I know this complicates everything," he said, moving closer. "I know we agreed this was just business. But Bella, when you smiled at me tonight during dinner, when you defended me to Michael without even thinking about it, when you looked at me like I was actually worth something—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Like you were what?" she prompted, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Like you were proud to be married to me." "Even if it is fake." The words broke something open in Bella's chest. She thought about her father, about the contract, about all the reasons this was impossible. Then she looked at Richard, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive clothes and calculated charm to the man underneath. The man who'd kept her hair brown because he thought she looked beautiful that way. The man who'd been patient with her fears and gentle with her inexperience. The man who was looking at her now like she was his salvation and his damnation all at once. "What if it doesn't have to be fake?" she heard herself say. Richard went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe somewhere between the makeovers and the etiquette lessons and learning to look at you like I'm madly in love, I forgot I was acting." The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility and terror. Then Richard stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Bella, if we cross this line, there's no going back. This isn't part of the contract. This is real." "I know," she whispered. "Your father's legal fees, your financial security, none of that changes. But this, us, this would be because we want it." "I know that too." Richard lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, once we make this real, I won't be able to pretend you're just a business arrangement anymore." Bella's heart was racing so fast, she was sure he could hear it. Every rational part of her brain was screaming warnings, but her heart, her traitorous, hopeful heart, was louder. "Then don't pretend," she said, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. The first touch of his lips was gentle, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. But Bella had spent 6 days fighting an attraction that had been building since the moment he'd challenged her in his office, and she was done fighting. She kissed him back with 6 days' worth of repressed longing, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pressed closer. Richard groaned against her mouth, his careful control finally snapping as he backed her against the glass door, one hand tangling in her hair, while the other pulled her firmly against him. This wasn't the practiced, public-appropriate kiss they'd rehearsed. This was desperate and honest, and absolutely devastating. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bella felt like her entire world had shifted on its axis. "Jesus, Bella," Richard breathed, resting his forehead against hers. "What are you doing to me?" "The same thing you're doing to me," she whispered back, then laughed shakily. "This is crazy, isn't it? We barely know each other. I know you take your coffee with too much sugar, and you bite your lip when you're nervous. I know you'd sacrifice anything for the people you love, and you have the most beautiful laugh I've ever heard. I know you're brave enough to marry a stranger to save your father, and stubborn enough to negotiate terms with a man who's used to getting his way without question." Each word made her heart flutter harder. "Richard, I know this is complicated and messy and probably the worst business decision I've ever made. But I also know that for the first time in my life, I don't want to be alone." Bella felt tears prick her eyes. "Neither do I. So what do we do now?" She looked at him, this complicated, arrogant, surprisingly tender man who'd turned her life upside down in the best possible way, and made a decision that had nothing to do with contracts or money or fake marriages. "Now we see where this takes us. For real this time." Richard's smile was soft and genuine, nothing like the practiced charm he showed the world. "For real," he agreed, then kissed her again, slower this time, like they had all the time in the world to figure out what came next. But even as Bella lost herself in the warmth of his arms and the promise in his kiss, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. In 3 days, they would have to leave Hong Kong. In 6 months, their contract would end. And falling in love had never been part of the deal. Still, as Richard lifted her in his arms and carried her inside, Bella decided that some risks were worth taking, even if it meant her heart might be the price she'd have to pay for her father's freedom. Especially if Richard's heart was on the line too. 3 months later, Bella should have been happier than she'd ever been in her life. Her father's case had been dismissed when new evidence proved his innocence. Apparently, a disgruntled employee had used his credentials for the embezzlement. Sebastian Sinclair was free, cleared, and safely back in his little house with his math books and crossword puzzles. Richard's business deals were flourishing. The Hong Kong project had been approved, Dubai had been a stunning success, and London had opened doors to opportunities across Europe. By every measure, their arrangement was working perfectly. So why did Bella feel like her heart was breaking a little more each day? She stood in the kitchen of Richard's penthouse, making coffee for one, since he'd left for the office before dawn again, and tried to ignore the growing distance between them. Ever since they'd returned from Hong Kong, something had changed. Not the passion. God knows, the nights they spent together were still incredible enough to make her forget her own name. But during the day, Richard had retreated behind his walls again, treating her with the same polite courtesy he showed his business associates. "Good morning, Mrs. Taylor," he'd said this morning, straightening his tie without meeting her eyes. "I'll be late tonight. There's a charity auction I need to attend." "Should I come with you?" she'd asked, even though she already knew the answer. "That won't be necessary. It's not a couples event." But she'd seen the invitation on his desk. It was exactly the kind of event they'd been attending together for months. Her phone buzzed with a text from Isabel. "Coffee later? You sounded weird yesterday." Bella typed back, "Can't. Richard has meetings." "Since when do Richard's meetings affect your coffee plans?" "Since I started pretending I was actually his wife instead of just an employee with benefits," Bella thought bitterly. "Since I forgot that no matter how real it feels, this still has an expiration date." 3 months left on their contract. 3 months before they'd divorce quietly, and she'd walk away with her payout, financially secure but emotionally devastated. The elevator chimed, and Victoria Chen's voice carried into the kitchen. Mr. Taylor, I have those contracts you requested. Bella frowned. Victoria was supposed to be in Hong Kong for another week. She was about to call out a greeting when she heard Richard's voice, lower than usual. Thank you. Any word from the lawyers about the dissolution papers? Dissolution papers. Bella's coffee mug slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. They're ready for your signature, Victoria continued, oblivious to the catastrophe she'd just caused. Mrs. Taylor's payout has been prepared as well. The full amount, plus the bonus you requested. Bonus? What bonus? Good, Richard said, his voice carefully neutral. The sooner we can finalize this, the better. It's getting complicated. Complicated. That's what she was. A complication to be resolved. Bella stood frozen among the coffee-stained shards of porcelain, pieces of her heart shattering just as completely. She'd known this day would come, had signed a contract agreeing to it. But somehow she'd let herself believe that what they'd found in Hong Kong had changed everything. Apparently, she'd been the only one foolish enough to believe their love was real. Moving on autopilot, she cleaned up the mess and retreated to her room before Richard and Victoria could discover her eavesdropping. She needed to think, needed to breathe, needed to figure out how she'd let herself become this pathetically dependent on a man who was already planning their divorce. Her laptop was still open to her job search from the week before, a half-hearted attempt to figure out what came after Richard Taylor. Now she stared at the screen with new determination. If Richard was ready to end this early, she'd be damned if she'd beg him to keep her around. 2 hours later, she'd updated her resume, applied to 6 positions, and called Dr. Morrison to ask about accelerating her father's case closure. She was in the middle of researching apartments when Richard appeared in her doorway. Bella? Victoria said she thought she heard something break earlier. Just a coffee mug, she said without looking up from her laptop. Don't worry, I'll replace it. Richard moved closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne, the same one that had driven her crazy in Hong Kong, that still made her pulse race despite everything. What are you working on? Job applications, she said matter-of-factly. I figured I should start planning for after. She felt him go very still behind her. After? After our contract ends. Or earlier, if you prefer. Finally, she turned to look at him, proud that her voice remained steady. I know you've been meeting with lawyers about the dissolution papers. The blood drained from Richard's face. Bella, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, she interrupted, standing up and moving past him toward the window. We both knew this was temporary. I just think we should be honest about our timeline instead of pretending otherwise. You want to end this early? His voice was carefully controlled, but she caught the slight tremor underneath. Bella's heart screamed at her to tell him the truth, that she didn't want to end it at all, that she'd fallen so completely in love with him that the thought of leaving made her physically ill. But pride and self-preservation won out. I think it would be best for both of us. You've gotten what you needed from this arrangement. My father is free, and we can both move on with our lives. Just like that? She turned to face him, memorizing his features one last time. The sharp line of his jaw, the storm-gray eyes that had seen straight through her defenses, the mouth that had whispered her name like a prayer just 12 hours ago. Just like that, she confirmed. Richard stood there for a long moment, looking like he wanted to say something else. Then his expression shuttered, returning to the cold businessman she'd first met in his office. Fine. I'll have the lawyers expedite the paperwork. You can be out by the end of the week. Each word was like a physical blow, but Bella kept her chin up. Perfect. That gives me time to find a place. The payout will be transferred as soon as the papers are signed, plus a bonus for... He paused, searching for words. For services rendered? She suggested bitterly. For being everything I needed when I needed it, he said quietly. The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her resolve, but she forced herself to nod briskly. Good. Then we both got what we wanted. Richard studied her face like he was trying to memorize it too. Yes, he said finally. I suppose we did. After he left, Bella sank onto her bed and finally let herself cry. She cried for the fairy tale she'd stupidly believed in, for the man she'd fallen in love with who'd turned out to be exactly what he'd warned her he was, and for the 3 months of pretending she'd thought had become real. But mostly, she cried because even now, even knowing he was ready to discard her like yesterday's newspaper, she still loved Richard Taylor with every broken piece of her heart. And in 4 days, she'd have to walk away and pretend she didn't. Outside, Seattle's skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to the fact that Bella Sinclair's world was ending. Again. Richard Taylor had built an empire by never letting emotions cloud his judgment. So why was he standing in his empty penthouse at 2 a.m, holding Bella's coffee mug, the replacement she'd bought before leaving, and feeling like his carefully constructed world had imploded? She'd been gone for 2 weeks. 14 days of Victoria asking where Mrs. Taylor was, of eating dinner alone, of reaching for her in bed only to find cold sheets. 14 days of telling himself this was exactly what he'd planned all along. He was a liar. The dissolution papers sat unsigned on his desk, mocking him. He'd had them prepared, yes, but not because he wanted out, because he'd panicked. Because watching Bella transform from the desperate waitress into the confident, brilliant woman she truly was had terrified him. She didn't need him anymore, and he'd convinced himself she'd leave eventually anyway. Better to end it on his terms than wait for her to realize she could do better. Except now she was gone, and he felt like he was suffocating. His phone buzzed. A text from James Chen. "Congratulations on the London deal. Eleanor insists you and Bella join us for dinner next time you're in Hong Kong. That wife of yours is a treasure." The irony was exquisite. He'd married Bella to convince people he was capable of love, only to discover he actually was, and then lose her because he was too much of a coward to admit it. His laptop chimed with an email notification. Probably another contract, another deal, another hollow victory that meant nothing without Bella there to share it with. But it wasn't business. It was from Dr. Morrison. "Richard, thought you should know that Bella came to see me today. She's insisting on paying back every penny of her father's legal fees from her savings. Says she doesn't want to owe you anything. I tried to talk her out of it, but you know how stubborn she is. She also asked me to give you this when the time was right. I think that time is now." Henry attached was a video file titled, "For Richard, the Truth." Richard's hands shook as he clicked play. Bella's face filled the screen, but not the polished, perfect Bella from their public appearances. This was the real Bella, hair in a messy ponytail, wearing an old sweater, sitting in what looked like a coffee shop. "Hi," she said to the camera, then laughed shakily. "This is weird. I don't even know if Henry will actually show you this, but I need you to hear something, and I'm apparently too much of a coward to say it to your face." Richard's chest tightened. "I know you think I left because I got what I wanted. My father's freedom, financial security, a clean exit from our arrangement. But that's not why I left, Richard. I left because I fell in love with you. Really, completely, stupidly in love with you. And I couldn't stand watching you pull away. Couldn't bear the thought of becoming just another business transaction you'd eventually regret." Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, and Richard felt his own eyes burning. "I know you warned me not to fall in love with you. I know our contract was supposed to protect us both from exactly this situation. But somewhere between Hong Kong and that night on the balcony, and all those mornings when you'd bring me coffee exactly how I like it, I forgot we were pretending." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I heard you talking to Victoria about the dissolution papers, about how complicated things were getting, and I realized you were already planning our ending while I was fantasizing about our beginning. So I left before you could fire me. I left because loving someone who doesn't love you back is the most expensive thing in the world, and I couldn't afford to keep paying that price." The video paused for a moment, and when it resumed, Bella had composed herself slightly. "I want you to know that despite how it ended, these 6 months were the most beautiful of my life. You made me feel worthy of love, even if it wasn't yours. You made me brave. You made me believe I deserved more than I'd ever dared to dream. And even though it nearly destroyed me, I don't regret a single second of loving you." She smiled through her tears, and it was the most heartbreaking thing Richard had ever seen. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy, Richard. Someone who sees past all that armor to the incredible man underneath. Someone who makes you believe that love isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes us strong. You deserve that. You deserve everything." The video ended, and Richard stared at his laptop screen in stunned silence. Then he was moving, grabbing his keys, not even bothering to change out of his pajamas as he headed for the elevator. He found her at the 24-hour diner where they'd had their first real conversation outside of business. She was sitting in a corner booth, laptop open, wearing the same sweater from the video. When she looked up and saw him, her face went white. "Richard? How did you find me?" "You always come here when you can't sleep," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I know because I've driven by 17 times in the past 2 weeks, hoping to see you." Bella stared at him. "You've been stalking me?" "I've been losing my mind," he corrected. "Bella, I saw your video." Her face crumpled. "Henry wasn't supposed to show you that unless—" "Unless what? Unless I proved I was the biggest idiot alive?" Mission accomplished. Richard reached across the table and took her hands, not caring that they were shaking. "I didn't prepare those dissolution papers because I wanted out. I prepared them because I was terrified you'd want out first." "What?" "I've spent my entire life believing I wasn't worth loving. My parents taught me that love was a transaction, something you used to get what you wanted. But you—" His voice broke. "You loved me anyway. Despite every wall I put up, every time I tried to reduce what we had to just business, you saw something in me worth fighting for." Bella's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, I pulled away because I was scared, because for the first time in my life, I had something I couldn't bear to lose, and I didn't know how to handle that. I thought if I could convince myself it was just physical, just convenient, I could protect us both from the inevitable disappointment." "But I wasn't disappointed," Bella whispered. "I was heartbroken." "I know. God, Bella, I know, and I'm so sorry." Richard lifted her hands to his lips, pressing desperate kisses to her knuckles. "I'm sorry I made you feel like you were just a complication. I'm sorry I let my fears hurt the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm sorry I made you think I didn't love you back when loving you is the only thing I've done right in my entire miserable life." The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. "You love me?" Bella asked, her voice barely audible. "I love you so much it terrifies me," Richard admitted. "I love the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. I love that you take your coffee with too much sugar and you cry at animal rescue commercials. I love that you're brave enough to sacrifice everything for the people you care about and stubborn enough to argue with me when you think I'm wrong. I love that you made me want to be the man you saw in me instead of the one I thought I was." Bella was crying openly now, but she was also smiling. "You really love me? I love you enough to tear up our contract and start over. I love you enough to get down on my knees in this diner and beg you to marry me for real this time. I love you enough to spend the rest of my life proving that love isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing in the world." And then Richard Taylor, billionaire CEO and master of the universe, slid out of his booth and dropped to one knee right there in the fluorescent-lit diner, pulling a ring box from his pocket. "Bella Sinclair, will you marry me? Not for business, not for convenience, not because either of us has to, but because I can't imagine a single day of my life without you in it?" The entire diner had gone quiet, customers and staff alike watching with bated breath. Bella looked down at him, this proud, difficult, wonderful man who'd just laid his heart completely bare, and felt her own heart finally heal from the cracks he'd put in it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, you ridiculous, impossible man. I'll marry you." The diner erupted in cheers as Richard slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her like she was his salvation. Which, Bella thought, as she kissed him back, she probably was. Just like he was hers. Epilogue. 2 years later. Mrs. Taylor, your husband is on line 1, Victoria announced from the doorway of Bella's new office at the Taylor Foundation, the non-profit she'd started to help families navigate the legal system. Thank you, Victoria. Bella smiled, still getting a thrill out of hearing herself called Mrs. Taylor for real this time. Richard, please tell me you're not calling to cancel dinner again. Actually, I'm calling to see if you can leave early. Richard's voice was warm with amusement. I have a surprise for you. What kind of surprise? Bella leaned back in her chair, looking out at Elliott Bay where their story had really begun. The kind that involves a private jet, champagne, and a certain Hong Kong hotel where we fell in love. Bella's heart skipped. Richard Taylor, are you kidnapping me? Only if you want to be kidnapped. James and Eleanor are renewing their vows next week, and they specifically requested that their favorite couple be there to celebrate. Their favorite couple? Apparently we're their success story. Eleanor takes credit for our happiness, says she knew we were really in love from that first dinner. Bella laughed, remembering how terrified she'd been that night. She was right, wasn't she? We just didn't know it yet. We knew, Richard said softly. We were just too scared to admit it. And now? Now I tell you I love you approximately 47 times a day, and you still haven't gotten tired of hearing it. That's because I love you approximately 48 times a day, Bella countered. I'm winning. You've been winning since the day you walked into my office and told me you wouldn't take the deal without conditions. That was the moment I knew you were going to change my life. Bella touched her wedding ring. Not the fake one from their first marriage, but the simple, perfect band Richard had given her during their real wedding 6 months ago. A small ceremony on the beach with just their families, exactly the opposite of the elaborate corporate events they used to attend. So, Mrs. Taylor, Richard continued, what do you say? Ready for another adventure? Bella looked around her office, at the photos of the families they'd helped, the thank you letters from clients, the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. Then she thought about her husband, probably pacing his office in excitement, still surprising her with romantic gestures, even though he no longer had to win her over. I say yes, she said, already reaching for her purse. I'll always say yes to adventures with you. Good, because I have about 50 years worth planned. Only 50, Bella teased, heading for the elevator. Well, we'll start with 50 and see how it goes. I love you, Bella. I love you too, Richard. More than coffee with too much sugar? More than happy endings? More than I ever thought possible. That's a lot of love. It's exactly the right amount, Bella said, watching her reflection smile in the elevator doors as she headed home to the man who'd taught her that the best deals aren't about what you get, but what you're willing to give. And they'd both given everything they had, their hearts, their trust, their carefully guarded vulnerabilities, only to discover they'd gained infinitely more in return. As the elevator doors opened onto the parking garage where Richard waited with his ridiculous grin and another spontaneous adventure, Bella realized their impossible agreement had become the most possible thing in the world, a love story that was completely, perfectly, forever real. Bekanoma.